Hey, I'm Jeremy. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Biocanic. So we are a health intelligence system designed specifically for functional, integrative, or holistic practitioners to really help streamline and scale their practices, but really engage with their individual clients to help them achieve the health outcomes that they're looking for on an individual basis.
That's why I had you do that because you're way better than me at introducing yourself. Thank you, Jeremy, for being on and doing this interview. Uh, just for some context, I think Jeremy, I've worked with him personally now for a little while, and we've integrated with his company. And so he's kind of like really on the ball all the time, a go-getter. And I was excited to have him on to kind of share the future of technology and healthcare and actually dive into his personal story a little bit to see how he kind of came about and is in this space. So Jeremy, if you would be so kind, how did you kind of end up where you're at now in health and wellness? Did you have a personal journey?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. So background biomedical engineering, spent my whole career in the traditional healthcare space. So was originally a signals and systems engineer for non-invasive cardiology devices, grew into marketing product management, led connected devices for ResMed and built their software as a service business. So we, launched the largest telemonitoring medical device platform in the world today for obstructive sleep apnea, which led us into the software as a service model and got us into practice management. So really no acute care EMRs, post-acute care EMRs. And while we were acquiring, we ended up acquiring about $2 billion in assets while I was there. One of the things that I really learned was this, that the technology systems have to be built for the care delivery model. And so during my time, as I was becoming into my late 30s and 40s, I was seeing personal declining health. My wife is a functional practitioner. I was her first client, went through that process. But really, everything came to a head for me. I was doing all the right things, eating organic, gluten-free, working out all the time, sober months, doing all the tricks of the trade. But every objective marker about my metabolic health was going in the wrong direction. And so working with my wife, we uncovered a number of different issues, but it wasn't really till we got to the root of my issue, which was related to both my genetics, my hormonal status, and my dietary lifestyle. And so it wasn't until a few years in where we kind of figured out that my issue was actually estrogen dominance, largely driven by what was a carb heavy diet. So even though I was doing the right things in terms of eating clean, grass fed, all that good stuff, I was still overdoing it on the carbohydrate side. And so once we kind of understood that from one of the medical directors at one of the hormone test companies, like, hey, why don't you go keto? I did that, but I
Hmm.
struggled. It actually didn't work for me. I couldn't get into ketosis for a long time. And the challenge was my individual kind of microbiome, my individual status was problematic because I'm actually reactive to beef and cow's milk.
Hmm.
And so I was actually going down the pathway of a traditional keto diet, right? Ribeyes, heavy whipping cream, and all that good stuff. But my history is that I was not breastfed as a kid. It was the, late 70s. It was kind of the thing that mothers did was to go to put you on breast milk, chronic ear infections. So I was on chronic antibiotics. My pediatrician literally said, just keep them on antibiotics. So my
Hmm.
microbiome just flat out doesn't support beef protein for whatever reason, right? Remains to be seen. And so once I was able to really uncover that and identify, where I had to kind of change the mix of my diet, but also controlling for glucose, then I was able to have that transformation. I ended up losing 40 pounds in about 3 months. It was a combination of inflammation, just overdoing it, getting down to be able to detox my estrogens, both on the filling of the bucket side and detoxing it on the other side. And that's really what became transformative. And that's really what led to what we built, which is Biocanic. And the idea behind the name is that you're biology mechanic. So if your car has a check engine light coming on, you go take it to the mechanic, they hook it up to a computer and it tells them the error code, right? And so that's the intention, which is, building a platform which combines all of this rich information that helps practitioners enable their clients to understand what are the levers that are going to drive the right outcomes for that individual at that time. What works for me, which is a non-beef based, largely carnivore keto-ish diet works for me, and it only works for me because of me, right? And so
Hmm.
how do we actually take all this data, bring it together in a way that you can find out what works for you, your mom can find out what works for you, your sister can find out what works for them in a way that's efficient, right? So how do you actually get somebody on the pathway so they're seeing results instantaneously, within a little, within reason, but seeing those results quickly, because when you start to see the pounds coming off, the brain fog going away, the inflammation, the pain coming down, that's what drives the motivation. And people are like, wow, I feel like I finally have control. And, maybe I choose not to adhere to my dietary program, but that's my choice now because I know what those levers are. And that is an empowering thing that we believe is what's going to drive the future of health transformation, which is empowering individuals to have control of their own health.
Amazing, and very, very cool story on exploration,
Yeah.
diving deep into what's going on with you. I did want to unpack a few things that you mentioned that I thought were interesting that probably other people think but never really ask or say. Where do you think why was it healthy for you to eat non-gluten, for example? Like all these
Yeah.
so-called guidelines or pathways that we choose as people, where did that come from for you? Why didn't it serve you? And what's your opinion on why it didn't?
Yeah. I mean, look, if you read a lot of the literature, I think, I think it comes out of Harvard, which is, look, if you're human, you're reactive to gluten. The question is not whether you're gluten intolerant, it's how what is your intolerance, right? And many people can deal with whatever the reaction is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's not a celiac response, it's actually an inflammatory response. So if I literally went out and I said, look, it's going to be one of those days, I want to eat the bread because it looks great. I know I'm going to get zits and back pain the next 2 days in the same spot every single time.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people are attuned to that. I mean, it's, that's the business that we're in is, so I'm really attuned to those types of things. So getting the understanding and be able to separate what's useful from the noise,
Mm-hmm.
right? And oftentimes, people will walk into, okay, hey, I'm going to finally do my health transformation and pull a bunch of levers. And then they don't really know what was actually working and what wasn't, right? And so that's really where the inside of the technology and the enablement of both the sensors, the lab data, and be able to track on the self-reported side is what's going to really drive the insight to actually helping somebody understand why those things are working or they aren't working, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really where this I think becomes super powerful, is giving people the ability to do that on their own.
And would you say we have now enough technology to make those? Because your journey, you summarized it, but obviously, I think I'm not going to speak for you, but it took some time and testing and back and forth, and then probably some art to it too. Oh, I noticed these zits like after like years of testing on yourself. Do you feel like we have technology now that gets us there much faster, or do you think, look, we still have a while to go? What's your take on it in that lens?
The challenge I think is it's not so much the lack of technology. I think the technology exists. The question is, what technology do you need to be able to answer the question that you're looking for,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, for example, I always tell the story when I started my health journey. We went down a gut health pathway, right? So I mentioned my historical background. So I just have a poor microbiome. I make for a good host. I had C. diff, SIBO, resistant H. pylori. We went down that pathway and we effectively resolve those issues. Yet I saw no net benefit in my health improvements,
Yeah.
right? So imagine running multiple microbiome tests, a SIBO breath test. It worked, but I was still gaining weight, still having back pain, still, seeing my blood pressure increase. The question was, where was that? What was the actual root cause of that? And that was actually because of the carbohydrate, the estrogen dominance, the inability to effectively detox that.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I like to put it is, look, the information was there. We were just looking at the wrong information. We should have started with this, the dietary approach related to my genetics and my hormones rather than focusing on the gut. And that can be a challenge today, right? So when we think about technology availability, you can go buy a direct to consumer. I'm going to go, do an at-home stool sample. I'm going to send it in. This consumer company is going to recommend some supplements. Okay, that's great. But is that really the root cause of my issue?
Yeah.
Sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. And that's really what one of my mentors in the space, Reed, says it's the cycle of trial and error. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. And if you're
Yeah.
lucky, that's great. You found the issue. But oftentimes, most people are then caught and they become demotivated and fall out of the cycle. So I think where the technology needs to come in, which is what is the piece of information that you need? What is the tool that you need now? Right. So this idea, if I'm always using a gut microbiome test as a hammer, I can't really drill in a screw. Right. So
Right.
the tool that I need is a screwdriver or that. But how do you know what tool you need based upon what the challenge is? And that's really where the technology has to come together. We can go down, we can do whole genome sequencing, we can do broad-based information, but again, it's like kind of a test of a population level, not at an individual level. So the question is, what is the next set of information that's going to inform me on making the right next step tomorrow?
Understood. And if somebody came to you right now and said, how do I do that? What would you advise them to do with all
So
these
today,
options,
yeah. So today there's basically four foundational tests that people run. So one obviously is blood chemistry. That's kind of standard. We know what to do with that information. The second's microbiome, just to really understand kind of where your gut health is at. It is important. We know it's tightly integrated to mental health, digestive health, hormone health. Then an advanced hormone test. The challenge with blood testing on hormones is just one snapshot, one day. The advanced hormone test is going to tell you a little bit more about your adrenals, how you're actually processing the various hormone metabolites to give you a view of more about how your hormonal system works. And then the controversial one is food sensitivity testing.
Mm-hmm.
I like food sensitivity testing. It's been super impactful for me because when you run a high quality, and not an at-home blood spot, a high quality food sensitivity, which means a blood draw, you can take advantage of that tomorrow. Even though there's an argument, well, your food sensitivity is a reflection of your gut health. So if you
Right.
fix your gut, your food sensitivity is not really meaningful. But your gut is going to take a long time to recover, to repair, to rebuild the microbiome or your gut barrier. Food sensitivity is something that you can do tomorrow and say, look, I'm reactive to beef and cow's milk. If I just take that out of my diet, I'm going to see an instant benefit. And that's a motivating factor, which is why we recommend that. So that's kind of like the four foundational tests.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next steps are kind of filling in the gaps, things like organic acids, give you a little bit more insight. Toxin testing, mold toxin testing. Mold's a huge problem in any developed country today. People underestimate that. Lyme testing, EBV, those kind of latent, more, I would say, kind of filling in the gaps, right? So if we're seeing something on those four foundational tests that aren't quite clear or they may be discordant in what we're thinking, then we need to say, I'm suspecting of something else, and that's the additional kind of layer.
Gotcha. And again, a lot to unpack there. I did want to dig in a little bit into the points that you made, because I know this comes up a lot, which is, you just mentioned I lost 30 pounds in, I think it was 3 months.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as you know, because I know you're well versed in this area, there's always those two schools of thought. One is calories don't matter whatsoever. Just intuitively eat or eat until you're not hungry or only eat whole foods. Then you have carnivore, keto, vegan keto, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have the other side of the camp, which is the only thing that matters is calories. And let's take out of context things like, eating 1,000 calories a day. Let's say you could actually do it for a long time, which is we know that that's almost impossible because you get so hungry at some point you binge. But let's say you could do it for 3 years, right? And let's say there was no impact on your organs or hormones of basically starving yourself, and you could lose weight. So what have you seen? Because you work with a lot of providers, you've probably seen these arguments 10 times over on any given Sunday. How do you perceive that, and what would you say to those people who are looking at both sides of that argument to kind of make sense of it, and or is the path like figure out all your markers, like as you were saying, like the 4 core ones and then the secondary ones, and see how you feel then, and then maybe combine it with calorie counting if that's easier for you to mentally visualize? Like what's your take on this exact topic? It's always talked about and never resolved, it feels like.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, on the calorie side, you do have to have a calorie deficit in order to lose weight, right? And if you're continuously eating calorie dense foods at, a high level, you're going to put on weight. It's just a matter of physics from that perspective.
Yeah.
The real question is, what's the goal here, right? So if you are a hyperthyroid female, you are actively burning, you have a higher energy metabolism, which causes you to increase that, but increase your caloric content, right? But even with that hyperthyroid activity, you need to understand, why is the thyroid hyperactive, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
a combination of genetics, lifestyle, external factors, and that's really where this objective testing comes in. Because what we want to do is we want to match the ability for that underweight female to basically add weight to get to their ideal weight. Similarly, somebody who is overweight or maybe above their ideal weight, you do need to be at a caloric deficit, but just calories alone isn't necessarily going to help you along the way, because your metabolism is going to readjust if that's the only lever you're pulling. So you have to think about, what does it look like from a sleep perspective? Am I undersleeping and then I'm in a chronic adrenal stress, which is causing me an inability to effectively manage my calories in, calories out from a burn perspective? Am I working out in a way that matches my genetics and my output to really get that fat oxidation going, so I can start leveraging my fat oxidation to ensuring that I'm not just burning the calories I'm consuming, I'm actually actively liberating fats into my bloodstream as a means to losing weight. That's really where this combination of things comes in. So, going back to this idea of the cycle of trial and error, some people have great results on a vegan diet, some people have great results on a carnivore diet. That doesn't mean anything for any individual, right? And the way I like to describe it is, I have 13 reactivities to vegetables and I have 6 proteins that I'm reactive to. So if I chose either one of those binary approaches, I would be in metabolic no man's land. So I would be restricted, I'd be overly restrictive on both sides, feeling awful and getting no benefit, right? And that's how I would end up. Now, maybe you may have a better benefit of somewhere else. A lot of people have great results on pure keto because they don't have the same type of issues as me. So that's where this kind of overly reductionist approach becomes problematic, because so many people do see great results, but that's just coincidence, right?
Mm-hmm.
They happen to fall into the right approach depending on who they are. And when you talk about kind of the ability to stay compliant on a given protocol, well, the compliance is not a level of effort if you're highly motivated, right? And so once you find what works for you, the compliance is a function of you wanting to stay on the path that you're on, stay at the weight that you're at,
Yeah.
and continue, because you feel great. You don't have brain fog. You can go play with the kids. You can go, play in your adult softball league without any pain or risk of injury. Those are the motivations that are going to keep people on an individual program. And then when you are able to see, right? So if you're just pure keto and then you're just like, oh, I'm just so tired of, heavy whipping cream in my coffee and eating ribeyes every night, and sour cream on my salads, right? Then that becomes tiring, because you're just like, I'm just doing a diet because I'm doing a diet, not that, hey, I know that when I do this, it equates to feeling more aware, more present in my relationships, better sleep, lower weight, my clothes feel better, and I'm more motivated. And I think that's where the challenge is. People want to become overly reductionist, that it's a binary thing, this or that. But I always like to say around healthcare, there's only one rule of your health, and that rule is, it depends. And it depends on you, depends on your genetics, depends on your lifestyle, depends on your sleep. It
Yeah.
all depends, right? And you can't be reductionist about it. It's our natural penchant to kind of simplify it to a binary for speed of thinking, but we have to kind of reject that for our own personal self, accept the fact that it's complex, and really work to become our own detective from that respect.
Yeah, makes sense. Another thing that you brought up that gets this discussed a lot is, you mentioned, are you are you accessing your fat burning pathways essentially, right? Are you setting your life up to do so? And the counter argument to that always is, or at least I think this is a good one, bodybuilders don't do any of that stuff. They count calories religiously, and then they do either a ridiculous amount of cardio to lose even more weight and or keep maintain that muscle with obviously high protein diets. We can, even if they're on steroids or not, they still kind of shape their body. They've been doing that for 50 years, not following any of this, newer diets, ancestral living, go back to how we were. What's your take on, are we getting better with technology, understanding that there's more efficient ways to do it than those guys have been doing it for decades? Is
Mhm.
it, does your research and what you guys work on with technology support that it is more efficient maybe, or a better way to get rid of that fat if you are in fat burning versus just reducing calories through exercise and or restricting calories by restricting food? What's your take on this? Because it is, again, it goes a little bit back to what we were talking about, calories and calories versus not. But they are a good example, those bodybuilders, of they don't really follow those rules. They eat from every food group, lots of variety usually, especially like in off season. So I'd love your take on how you see that viewpoint and what you guys are looking at in terms of studies.
Yeah, it's funny because you're kind of doing the same thing that everybody else does, which is bodybuilders, right? There's
Yeah.
one type of bodybuilder, right? Well, for every successful bodybuilder that you can point out, I can show you nine that are failed, right? And there are people that are in the gym that are thinking they're doing it right. They're
Yeah.
doing the quote unquote bodybuilding approach, but they're unsuccessful because it's not actually working for them, right?
Hmm.
You can profile them right away, right? So you're looking at somebody who's got putting on a ton of mass, except they are now have a distended abdomen, they've got hair loss, they've got acne, they have skin issues that are showing up. They're
Yeah.
probably having sleep issues. And so, yes, the bodybuilding approach has worked
Yeah.
for those that approach worked for, and then they are ultimately successful, right?
Yeah.
And that's the same idea, I think, with the dietary approach as well, which is how do you actually tease that out? And yes, you have super successful people where the particular, hey, this is the bulking phase, this is my cut phase, this is what I do. I'm gonna eat lean chicken and rice, and then I'm gonna do cardio at a zone
Yeah.
2 cardio 5 days a week and only lift heavy. Right. There's any litany of kind of menus of options, but again, it's really trial and error, not objectively driven.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think the challenge and the complexity is, right? Because we put a bodybuilder on a pedestal that does this, therefore I'm going to do this because I want to be there,
Hmm.
without any objective data behind whether that's actually going to work for me to get to that goal.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point, which is you brought up the same argument that I bring up, which is, yeah, they might have muscle, but that's basically where the buck stops, right? Because like you said, they might have, and a lot of them die early, because of A, overdose of performance enhancing drugs, or B, the way they're eating and working out is not actually conducive to longevity, for example. Right. So it is always going back to what you said. It does depend, and people hate that answer.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
look, one of the perfect examples is I have a friend and colleague who is on testosterone replacement therapy.
Yeah.
Saw great results, and then all of a sudden started putting on weight and wasn't seeing it. So staying on, they're increasing his testosterone dose because it's not
Yeah.
getting the right outcomes that he's looking for based upon whatever his goal was originally.
Hmm.
Run an advanced hormone test on him, and testosterone's actually at the high end for his individual age range. Yet all of his estrogen markers are off the chart.
Hmm.
And so what's happening is it's this reductionist idea that, hey, the more the better. Well, this person's actually, from their practitioner and prescriber, is getting overdosed on testosterone.
Yeah.
And what's happened is he's driven up his testosterone so high that his body can no longer process it. And now it's dumping it and it's aromatizing it into estrogen pathways. And it's actually pushing hard. So my issue, I have family history of estrogen-driven cancer. I was at what's called like a 1.1, 1.0 is considered high.
Yeah.
He was at a 1.25. So not only was he not seeing the results that he was going for by doing kind of this testosterone supplementation, it was actually pushing him in the wrong direction, thinking he was healthy without that objective insight, we wouldn't have known to actually back him back down from the dosage that the prescriber recommended. And that's one of the challenges that you see with a lot of kind of the online approaches.
Yeah.
Hey, telemed, hey, I have ED, headaches, weight gain, and everything else. Sure, here's some testosterone therapy. And oftentimes, and we hear this from doctors who don't use the objective testing, they're like, yeah, why are my clients complaining of sore nipples, breast growth, smaller testicles? And it's like, you're not testing, you're pushing them too hard, and the body's responding in the wrong way. And so without that objective information, you're actually doing more harm than good.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Why do you think the medical system hasn't undertaken, let's say, all or some of the things that we've talked about so far in this interview? Where do you see roadblocks to getting that information and making the right assessment for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of huge roadblocks. One, a physician doesn't have the time to get in at the individual level under the current reimbursement system. So that's just a challenge. They're a volume-based clinic for episodic care. They have to get in, get out. They have to prescribe, refer, and chart and bill for an E&M or whatever procedural code that they're doing. That's just not going to change with the amount of increasing volume of people with chronic disease and pathways. The other side of this is we've become in the traditional healthcare system so dependent upon the double-blind placebo-controlled trial that it's problematic. Okay. So if I have a novel pharmaceutical, I've got a biologic injectable that doesn't exist in nature, and I go, and I put it in 100 people and I don't put it in 100, that's easy. You can power the study to show a significant difference. Mm-hmm. What we're talking about in the functional integrative holistic world is diet, lifestyle, sleep, exercise, stress management, caloric content. Okay. Those are 5 completely heterogeneous variables. You cannot power a study to have a double-blind placebo-controlled outcome at all. It's just impossible to run. Mm-hmm. And so what's happened is to say that, hey, look, a given intervention is going to drive the desired outcome in a placebo-controlled way is impossible. So we have an impossible acceptance standard in the traditional healthcare model. Yeah. So that's not going to change, right? It works for pharmaceuticals. We're relying on pharmaceuticals. Yeah. It does not work for holistic or functional or whole person interventions. And so that's really what the prevention is. So an insurer is not going to pay for anything unless there's that placebo-controlled outcome data. I get it. They're businesses, they're for-profit businesses. If you have an S&P 500 index fund, you want them to make more profit. So not disparaging, it's great people there, but they are a coin-operated business. So the only way that it really changes is for people to take ownership of their own health, because it's not going to happen from the system itself, because it's just not set up that way. The unit economics are completely off for what we want as individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how do you see that actually unfolding? Because we could say you got to have personal ownership, which I personally believe in 100%, have my whole life, battled through numerous things health-wise too to get through the other side. I wouldn't have done it otherwise. What about people who are indoctrinated with all these foods that are now very addictive, right? That's how they were made. They're getting marketed to all the time. It's cheaper. Usually, I know someone's going to argue this in the comments for sure, but you can eat healthy on a budget, all this. I understand that. It's just not what they were taught. It's not what their habits were built around. They're not as satiating. Well, they are, but they don't think so in the beginning. And then, it's not as addictive and it's not a dopamine rush like the other ones have been made. How do you propose maybe using is like technology part of that answer, where it's like, if you can see something right away, how it's happening, or here's like your weekly review of your data and you can actually see your health, how it's performing objectively, not how do you feel after taking the supplement? Because you might have just had a fight or got a raise, right? So it's like those things are always out of context, and to put them in context is very difficult because you don't really you're not tracking that, right? So how would you in a perfect world, or how are you guys helping progress forward this way to be self-accountable and making it so that it's appealing to people who are getting bombarded with billion-dollar companies whose
Yeah.
sole purpose was to invent something that's more addictive so you'd buy more of it?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, first, I mean, the biggest way that this changes is it changes from healthcare insurance driven to consumer driven. And that's already happening today.
Mhm.
The reason why the shift to consumer driven healthcare is happening is we've seen the insurance plans go from, everything's covered to high deductible with a high out of pocket expense and a high pocket maximum, right? So people are already accustomed, well, I need to pay because I have a $9,000 and a $10,000 deductible. So I'm already now getting accustomed to paying for medical services. That's the biggest hurdle to get past. The second side of this is the awareness of the bullshit that people are spending their money on,
Mhm.
right? So I have a Peloton, a gym membership, I have a cupboard full of supplements, I have a whole bunch of stuff that I'm using. I did a juice cleanse. I've got, my buddy's supplement that he recommended.
Yeah.
The gym, and I got the Knox drink with the, pea protein, pre-workout, post-workout. By the time you actually add up all of
Yeah.
that consumer spend, you're actually more than double the actual healthcare spend there is today, even with all the pharmaceutical hospital costs that you imagine. It's a $7 trillion industry, and it's the same outcome people are looking for. You're investing in that supplement, that juice, the wellness clinic, the hyperbaric oxygen, whatever you're spending your money on to be healthier and feel better. You're just not spending it in the right way. So when you take this kind of shift of the consumer mindset of I need to pay out of pocket to get the healthcare that I want. I'm paying it already. So I'm spending, $10,000 on average a year. I just don't feel it because it's a $60 here, $100 there,
Yeah.
$20 there, $8 there. Once I think about it, I'm like, look, if I told you that if you gave me $10,000, I could give you the health outcome and the tools to be healthy in the next 3 months, people will do it, right? But
Yeah.
they have to recognize that, look, I'm spending it now rather than just being bled dry on wasted consumer spend. That's the next phase of this. And it's already happening where we're seeing it with our practitioners. Now, the challenge is you as a consumer finding the right practitioner who can see you in a timely manner, because this is not easy, right? A practitioner is going to spend
Yeah.
6 to 8 hours going through all of your data, who you are, your family, your sleep, your stress, to get you on what is the step today, the step tomorrow, the step 3 weeks from now, the step after that, to get you on that pathway and enable you to actually control your health in the
Yeah.
future. That's kind of the third phase of this, which is how does this actually scale mainstream?
Amazing. And we have a little bit of time left, so I wanted to shift a little bit of this focus. I think we've done a lot of digging into the system, different testing, how to personalize health, how to motivate people, what it's going to take systematically. Can you talk a little bit about how Biocanic, that is, been empowering these providers that you just mentioned? That was a good segue.
Mm-hmm.
How is Biocanic helping these providers? Let's say you get a good one, you resonate with them, they understand you, you can tell that they're actually wanting to understand where you're coming from, what's going on in your life. How does Biocanic play a role in bridging that relationship closer and
Yeah.
or giving insight to those parties involved?
Yeah, great question. So the biggest problem that we saw when we started in 2018 is well-known practitioners. We work with a very large clinic in Northern California, best-selling author, everything else. They were losing 75% of their clients or patients after the results review. And the issue was the individual would get a 8 to a 20-page Word document of everything they needed to do. Supplements, recommendations, here's how to sleep, here's what you need to do, blah, 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 go meditate, acupuncture.
Yeah.
Okay, when you get 21 things to do tomorrow, you do 0
Yeah.
because the cliff is too hard to climb. You also don't understand the context. And I always jokingly tell the story when I first started down this pathway, I would ask my wife, hey, why am I buying this $70 bottle of Thorne digestive enzyme? She goes, don't you remember on page 3 of the test that you have blah, 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 blah? And I was like, no, I don't. I have 5 PDF documents. I have a Word document with supplements. I'm trying to track my health and I don't remember why. And
Yeah,
so is how do you actually bring all this rich information together in a way that both the practitioner can see the information quickly, but then the patient or the client can actually connect the dots, right? So when you go through and you have 4 different lab tests and you have your different information and you see you're lit up on gut dysbiosis and they make a recommendation that you need a probiotic, digestive enzyme, BioDX, and gut restore with L-glutamine or something like that. Now it's like, okay, that's right. I'm working on this. That's why I'm taking this. That's why I'm adding fermented foods or I'm changing my diet in a certain way. Then when I come back and I retest and I see those markers have changed, that becomes the reinforcement mechanism. And you can't do that without technology because otherwise you just have disconnected data points. And that's what really brings the connection between the practitioner and the client together that drives the outcomes everybody's looking for.
very cool. And where do you see that going, that connection? That's where it is now.
Mhm.
What do you think? Where do you think it's going to be, or where are you guys building for it to be in 3, 5, 10 years from down the road?
Yeah, I mean, look, the biggest challenge is getting we believe fully in the practitioner market. We don't believe that these kind of direct to consumer artificial intelligence systems are built on anything other than they just, scraped a bunch of clinical data. That is not individualized recommendations. The practitioner's challenge is making sense of all the data quickly and effectively. We believe that there's kind of a next layer of technology, which is called clinical decision support, which is starting to surface insights to the practitioner saying, hey, look, did you know 70% of people like Jeremy have benefited from a low FODMAP diet that restricts beef and cow's milk? That that interpretation, without having to go to PubMed, without having to go to my community, without having to go to the interpretation guide, saves time and effort. And then the practitioner has the ability to look at you and say, okay, are you willing to make the change? Can you make the change? Can you afford the change? If not, how do we actually tailor this to you as an individual? Maybe you're, I can't afford all these supplements. Okay, well, then let's focus on this. Or hey, you're a shift worker. Okay, so how do we reprioritize and get you on a path? Because just data and a recommendation doesn't make sense. We still need the human to kind of humanize it for the individual. And that's why we're so focused. And so really bringing the data and the correlations across these different systems to help speed that is where we see this going in the future.
Very cool. Couple more questions and then we'll wrap it up. We're getting close here. And so from everything that you said, what's interesting to me to maybe dive into a little bit more is does that recommendation when it pops up, is it still too general? Like how much data points do you feel like you guys will need to actually get to a point where that recommendation has, let's say, like 80 to 90% efficiency rates, right? Like how many Jeremys that are X amount of age that live in Miami that have grown up a certain way, because there's going to be so many variables on, as we just talked about, for every individual. How do you see kind of navigating that, and what's your take on like building that in the future?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's going to improve over time, right? And we tend to forget how things have evolved, right? And so I'll use kind of this idea around spell check, right? So originally, when we first started Microsoft Word, we'd have to go hit F7 to do a spell check. The next evolution was, hey, I'm identifying words and I'm underlining them that appear to be misspelled, right? And then the original iPhones, hey, I'm suggesting replacements and then I'm going to suggest word replacements based upon your misspelling. Now, in the context of the words around it, I'm now suggesting words without you having to type it because of the probability that that next word is connected to the word before it, right? Now you have predictive text within Gmail, and now, of course, everything is Chat GPT, right? And so the same thing is going to happen. It's going to be an evolution over time. So the initial recommendations based upon multimodal data will kind of, be very rudimentary and basic, but those will become more specific as the data sets get more powered. The challenge today is outside of us, there's very few systems that have any centralized data of any magnitude at all. We continue to grow, but we're orders of magnitudes away, right? So if you think about all of the data that you're able to tune from ChatGPT across, I think they use Reddit and all these public sites and Wikipedia and everything else.
Yeah.
We're talking trillions of data points, right? The centralization of that data just doesn't exist today, but we're starting on that pathway. And
Mhm.
as those data sets get larger, the acceleration of the recommendations will continue to increase over time. I
Yeah.
mean, interestingly, I did put in to ChatGPT, I said, hey, what is the interpretation of somebody with gut dysbiosis and adrenal stress, and what would be the recommendation? And it wasn't that far off.
Yeah,
Except that everything that you ask, it always has the caveat of talk to your doctor first,
for
which is
sure.
hilarious how they've trained it to always put that in there, or I don't know if it's always just associated with it,
Yeah.
but it wasn't actually that far off. And that was, 30 seconds of taking two different data sets and putting it in. So I
Yeah.
think, that those types of technologies will enable that faster because you're not building it from scratch. You're just leveraging it for the application.
Yeah. Makes sense. Awesome. We'll do one more question here and then we'll let you go. How do we get insurance to cover this?
You don't. What people don't understand about the insurance industry, and I alluded to this, insurance is a for-profit business. Okay. They, in the US market, they have a thing for their commercial covered lives called the medical loss ratio. That means they cannot make profit more than 10 or 15%, depending on the number of covered lives. If you are a for-profit business and you need to increase your profit uh, and that needs to grow over time, the only way to increase your profit is to increase your revenue, which is increasing claims. So the ability of getting somebody into the system and then reducing claims is counter to the business model of the traditional commercial insurance model. So the money does not make sense for commercial insurance to cover it. That being said, there are two health systems where there is opportunity. Medicaid is on what's called a capitated model, which is they get paid on a per life basis. And so any ability to cut cost makes sense for them because Medicaid is not a for-profit system.
Yeah.
The other side is the military health system. Military health system, if you're, if let's say you're in Iraq, you got TBI from a roadside bomb, they own you for life. So it's in their best interest. They're not, the military health system, again, not trying to make a profit like, a Cigna or an Aetna. So there is a need to be able to get that in and be able to drive cost out of the system. They've issued a number of memos over the last 20 years around things like how do we get people off of opioids? How do we increase mindfulness, meditation, holistic approaches to help improve soldiers' lives along with their loved ones. So there is some opportunity, but I think when people try to focus on the commercial $3 trillion animal, we just full stop. It's not going to work unless the whole economics change,
Yeah.
which is like government subsidized healthcare, which is just not going to happen in the US market.
Gotcha. So to nitpick a little bit there is an argument to be made if you go to insurance, let's just hypothetically say you do this. It costs insurance about $14,500 a year if you're a diabetic. So if you're not a diabetic, you're averaging, let's say, like 4,000 to 6,000. So wouldn't it be useful for them to cover something that maybe costs them $1 or $2 grand a year to save 10? Like, can't you make that argument, or are you saying the system does not work that way at all?
In order to make more money, you have to issue more claims. The other thing is, as a commercial insurer, I'm kicking the can down the road. So investing in your health today doesn't save me money tomorrow because you're going to switch plans along the way. You may be Cigna one week, Aetna the next week. You may go into Blue Cross Blue Shield the week after, well, not week, the year after that because you're moving jobs. Maybe you're in the marketplaces or not. So investing in the long-term health, the only thing that I would potentially be worried about is just managing, how am I managing that medical loss ratio, right? And so if that is not a cost center for me, and I'm not worried, I always say insurers have the Jay-Z conundrum. They have 99 problems and this is not one of them, right? And so the idea is, is it a high ticket cost? Can it move my bottom line? I don't care about you as an individual. The question is, does this policy change, coverage change, reimbursement change affect my ability to increase my bottom line, then I care. Otherwise, I don't. And that's where I think
Yeah.
people, people are, they're altruistic. You may have highly empathetic people working at Cigna that care about health, that care about all that stuff. But at the end of the day, this is a corporate for-profit entity, and
Yeah.
it's their job to maximize profits. And people they conflate what is well-intentioned individuals in a for-profit multi-billion-dollar business.
Yeah. Makes sense. Very cool insights. And thank you, Jeremy. That was amazing. Anything you want to add, either personally or for Biocanic, before we wrap this up?
No, I mean, look, we're Biocanic, biocanic.com, practitioners that are looking for technology to streamline their approaches in this functional holistic space. Definitely come check out our website. We also have a free community site that we provide to anybody. It's called the Health Intelligence Exchange. It's hix.biocanic.com. We do live events every single week. We highlight people. We had the Theia team on. We're just really trying to elevate the collective knowledge about personalized health opportunities, technologies, industry movement. So it's a really great way to bring everybody better together and have a conversation about it.
Amazing. And for anybody watching, we've linked everything Jeremy just mentioned down below. So please go follow Biocanic. Please go follow Jeremy. Join the community. It's amazing. I've been there personally, so I can vouch for it. And as you can see, Jeremy is a wealth of knowledge, and so are his team. And obviously, they have a huge provider network that are working together to solve these problems. So click down below, go do it right now. You won't regret it. And thank you again, Jeremy. We had a great time, and I'm sure we'll have you on again.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks. Appreciate it. See you, everybody.